I wanted to talk about the concept of hope today, and really about the paradox of hope and how it can stop us from processing what's real for us right now. And I want to have the caveat of hope is a very, very important thing to have. Sometimes it's all that keeps us going. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't have hope or that it's a bad thing. I'm not trying to demonize it in any way, because it's super, super fucking important. But, however, when we have hope for a situation and that's what we process and that's what drives us forward, it makes it conditional. So there's a really great quote from Mark Manson. He wrote a book. A lot of people have heard the book of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, but his book after that, Everything is Fucked, a book about hope, is really, really interesting, and it feels really significant in times like this. So he has a quote, to transcend the transactional realm of hope, one must act unconditionally. And I really like this perspective because it's like the example of, there's so many, I'm going to get super ripped and fit because that will make someone love me. There's the hope there of, oh, well, I'm only going to do this because then there's the hope that this is how it will work out. But what happens is, if that doesn't work out, or likely when that doesn't work out, because that's not what that's about, when that doesn't work out, it then lessens the importance and the processing of what you were doing or what you were saying. Or if it's the hope of, I'm going to feel good now because there is every chance this perceived future could work out in the future, right? So I'm going to feel good now and I'm not going to worry about it now, because I'm choosing to believe that this bad thing isn't happening now until I know later if it is or not. And again, there's useful things in that process, but there's an element of not processing what is real right now. It could be the lack of processing that you aren't in a particular situation right now because you don't know if it'll turn out later and in the future. And if I just choose to hold hope for the future that this specific scenario will work out, so I'm not going to worry about processing and moving through it now, which most often just delays the inevitable, and you have to move through it and process it later, because that hope may not have been based on what's real right now. Maybe it is, maybe it's useful, but the point is, hope is transactional sometimes when it comes to what we allow ourselves to process now, or what we allow ourselves to choose to do or act in now. And the quote where it says one must act unconditionally, it's really about checking back in with you and what would you do, what suits you, what serves you, what would you do, or how would you act, or how would you show up, even if it may not work out in the way that you're hoping. And that's not to say that things won't work out. I am a firm believer that things will always work out, but sometimes we have to go through the shit to do it. Sometimes, always, because we're human and we're in this life, there is always shit to go through. And that doesn't play a role in whether or not things work out. It's just an element of it. It's like the saying of, the boulder isn't the obstacle, it is the path. So sometimes we have to work through these things to become the person that we need to be for things to eventuate in the way that we want to. But when it comes to hope in a very, very specific scenario, it is important to dream, it is important to hope. But when it comes to how we show up in that, we must act unconditionally regardless of whether or not that scenario shows up. So we must process what we need to process now, regardless of whether it does work out in the end. That's okay. It's important to process the emotions of feeling like it's all falling apart now anyway. And this is an example, like this is a scenario that works in multiple scenarios. So hope isn't just about relationships or global pandemic or whether you can have food on the table or not. It's about everything, and it plays a role in everything. So there's an infinite number of examples I could give, which is why I'm kind of trying to avoid giving any at all, or too many at all, because then I'd be here all day. And I feel like you probably get the idea anyway, is that we can have hope and we can dream and we can be working towards a certain kind of life, but we shouldn't put off processing what we need to process now within us, our emotions, our feelings, our what's good for us right now, in the hope that we won't really need to process it when this future eventuates in this very specific way, because that kind of isn't the point. Sometimes the future we need to process what we need to process for that future to eventuate, or sometimes that particular line of time of future doesn't happen in that way, and we still need to process what we could have processed back here anyway. And that's my big point. So allow yourself to have hope, but also consider that there is a transactional element to hope. I really like these words he's used. So there's a transactional element to hope, and consider how you are acting conditionally in that hope, and see how you can then process and alter how you show up so you're acting more unconditionally regardless of that hope or that line of hope. So it's not saying don't do it, it's just saying look at how you show up in the now in relationship to what you hope for.